Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today's August 22, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. And a special thanks to Doug Harvey for introducing me to our guest today, Daniel M. Hawkins. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Daniel?
I'm from calling in from Eagle Rock, just on the outskirts of Los Angeles, California.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
God, I would say our kind of sensory input and just what we can take in and enjoy and make meaning of. I
Yeah.
think just to throw a little bit of explanation to that answer, I've been very heat averse this summer, and I've been spending a lot of time indoors. And I wandered outside like a week ago when temperatures started to break, and oh my god, it was one of the best days of my life. The cool breeze kind of coming over my skin, the sounds, the smells, and so I think that's been sticking with me lately.
We got away with murder, man. I mean, some people suffered, but this last month or so, it has been amazing weather. And,
Yep.
to have these rainstorms, then all of a sudden the sun shining is like, well, we're back to sunny California.
Exactly.
So, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh God. I would say films, like narrative films, because you get to experience usually a layer of um, like auditory storytelling, visual storytelling, and music. And maybe if it has a particularly good soundtrack, but I just find myself like I often identify as a visual artist and a sculptor, but my primary kind of thing that I gravitate towards and get most of my stimulus from is film. So for sure,
Great.
film.
Beautiful. And so, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
That's a. I think I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who called me about 3 hours ago, and he was panicking about AI. And he's a filmmaker, and he was literally going down kind of an existential spiral. And I told him, I don't know if this was reassuring or if it really even had much response to his initial panic, but I basically said, there's something very unique about the human mind and culture and storytelling that, like, the earliest elements of culture are cave works, and I think the leading hypothesis is that those are basically apparatus of storytelling, where they would gather in a cave during a fire, and then they would kind of share stories and make kind of sense of their reality. And so I kind of just think maybe our neural network must be built towards taking in data and reconfiguring it and kind of sending it back out. And I've kind of grappled with a question of why do I make art? Because there's no shortage of things out in the world, and there's thousands, however many shows actively being put out. And I primarily rest on the fact that, like, the world doesn't make sense to me, and I have like an internal world that makes more sense. And so I basically am taking endless things in, and then I kind of send them back out and hopefully kind of reshape reality to make more sense to my brain. So
Well,
yeah.
you covered the waterfront there. You just covered all my questions.
Oh.
You can end now. Thank you. No, that was beautiful. You're really articulate, Daniel, and I appreciate that. But I just wanted to say, tell your friend, get over it. AI, there's no difference from a cave painting and a cell phone and a bulldozer and a toothpick and an AI. It's human inventions, and you
Yeah,
got to have the ability to understand their services and
exactly.
their disservices. So panic all you want and just flip it. Tell them my favorite is flip it into IA. That's McLuhan's integral awareness. you know,
Oh my goodness.
or
Okay, well,
my favorite is my friend calls it artificial ignorance. What's the difference? I mean, so we're
yep.
going to get into all this right now. So you already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's deeply innate, and I think it can vary person to person pretty wildly, though.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, I think it's a kind of like a biochemical process. I mean, there could be like a cosmic aspect to it, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Do thoughts create emotions?
I think completely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
I would say I don't know what I think until I act.
act. Good word, man. I
Yeah,
don't get that very often. McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. So that was good. Can humans think without language?
I don't know. I want to say I am a kind of a I flirt with mindfulness practices. And
Yeah.
so I'm pretty entry level on that, and sometimes I practice, sometimes I don't. But there is an interesting thing where in many mindfulness meditations, language is a part of it, but there's definitely like a kind of reorienting uh, your awareness towards stimuli and just what you're taking it right at the moment. And I'd classify that as a form of thinking. It's not necessarily like creating
Yeah.
complex thoughts, but I'd like to say yes. I'd lean towards it. Yes.
Yeah. That's Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How can you do?
Yeah,
It's sort of like meditators. They go, okay, now think about not thinking.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
What do I do personally?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. I think that I listen.
Oh my God. You're knocking them out of the park here, dude. That's act, listen. That is good. And by the way, when you said I don't know, that's what I want you to feel you're comfortable. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to put you on the spot and trick
for
you
sure.
like, well, that's a neuroscientist question. I can't answer. That's just your hunch, your guess, saying I don't know or I can't answer. That's totally welcome. It's all good. So your basic observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I think it's all on the same. It's like two ends of the same stick.
Yeah.
I would say I'm more of a feeling being,
Yeah.
and then probably my brother's more of a thinking being.
Yeah. It's good. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't I don't think so. And like I don't know if spirituality comes up, but I've gotten questions about and been in conversations about spirituality and the afterlife and consciousness. And I kind of think where I'm at right now is that there is consciousness extends beyond our current kind of physical manifestation on earth. And I don't know that that consciousness is particularly attached to what we experience as thinking.
Yeah. Well, you anticipate a question, but I'm not going to ask it yet because it's coming up in two more questions. You must have ESP, dude. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Well, okay, so I was just watching a video earlier today on the consciousness of
Yeah.
octopi,
Yeah.
and that they are actively studying whether octopi dream, and they believe now that they do. And then the video then uh, went on to talk about plants, and plants have a lot of electrochemical signals that they give off that we're only learning about is when a tomato is cut in half. Apparently, it's sending out all these signals, and when another thing they were studying is when plants are they don't have enough water. They actually are sending out. We can't hear it, but if we were to interpret it based
Yeah.
on our kind of sonic waves, it sounds like bubbles popping. And
Wow.
so I kind of think that those would classify as forms of thought.
Yeah. So, but that's that you were talking about things that aren't man-made. A machine is man-made per
Yeah.
se. Can
So yeah.
machine think? Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I didn't complete that thought. And so what I would say is if they don't, I think they will.
Okay.
Based on that kind of more expansive
Yeah.
idea of what thinking could be.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also I love your exploration into that animals, plants, but we don't know. That's anthropomorphizing our words onto other creatures. We don't
For
know
sure.
if octopus have a word for dream or a word
Absolutely.
for consciousness.
Yeah.
So, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning,
Yeah.
for sure.
Now, here's the question you anticipated. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I think we detect it. I think we're like antennae.
Yeah.
And one of my one of my favorite musicians is Brian Wilson, and it's funny because his music doesn't reflect anything that I tend to pursue. But he's also an interesting example of someone who kind of seemed to be like deeply resonating with some form of intelligence and creativity at a really specific time period, and then like that signal, either through a lot of different circumstances of his own or his not his own fault, kind of seemed to lose that signal a little bit. And I
Yeah.
do think, thinking about consciousness broadly, yeah, I think we're antennas. And then creatively, I think creativity is like there's some kind of conduit that we'll stumble onto a conduit and be a receiver for.
Yeah. Really well put, Daniel. It's Martha Graham said, great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times.
Yep. I agree.
And so, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I would think light. I don't know why, but
Yeah, that's fine. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rayner responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
well, I earlier mentioned that I identify or have identified as an artist, a visual artist, and a sculptor. And I was recently at I forget if it was an opening or maybe it was a screening, and someone asked me what I've been up to, and it just felt like a disingenuous answer because like I more and more identify with leveraging the tools of mass media like film and music versus kind of sculpture or painting that are often relegated to galleries and actually
Yeah,
more like economic showrooms.
yeah,
And so I would say like any form of mass media would be one of
yeah,
the greatest tools at this current moment.
dude, that's totally McLuhan and Warhol. I mean, Warhol and McLuhan both said art is anything you can get away with. And
Yep.
what'd he do? He wanted to get blowjobs from Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. So what'd he do? He made a picture of comfort food, his mom's thing that made him feel good.
Yep.
He wasn't trying to do anything but be another Duchamp clone. And anyways, it's funny what you just said was so well put. Marshall said this amazing thing. He said, "You can't write the great American novel. The great American novel is the front page of the newspaper." And that's like every time I open up, I'm dated AOL email, I get 3 little headlines. I was like, I don't want to see headlines when I'm trying to correspond, but there's no escaping it. And there's the great there's the tool, like you're saying, it's right there in front of you. Very good. Smart. What new toy do you suggest?
It based on that last question.
Well, it's just because I've been asking the tool question for so long, and then someone said, "Well, what about a toy?" And then it made me just say, "Well, now I'll add another question.
Yeah.
What new toy do you suggest?" Yeah. So I mean, however you want to interpret it.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, my guess would be a smartphone.
Yeah.
Just because it has incoming access points and outgoing access points with one. It's almost, a portal, a literal portal where you can take in an endless amount of information and you can be sending out text, audio, video. And so I think the world, as we've seen with Donald Trump, has been quite destabilized with a simple smartphone.
Exactly. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Climate change, probably the most. Yeah.
So here's what you anticipated big time, Daniel. Really an honor and a pleasure to be with you, and you're very smart, and I'm learning a lot. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, like you said, mass media, so that we might be able to learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. Like your friend, oh my God, AI, panic.
Yeah.
So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think for survival is my guess. And even I find myself in pretty habitual self-comfort rituals to just disconnect and try to escape the like existential fright of the world and the human condition.
Yeah. I asked my niece once, she was watching something stupid on TV. I says, "Why are you watching this?" She goes, "'Cause nothing else is on." Now that sounds stupid, but she had said, "This is the period I'm just going to veg out on the couch," and like you say, self-comfort ritual, just calm out. So it didn't matter what was on TV.
Yeah.
Do artists have moral obligation?
I believe so.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm more afraid of repeating the past. So
Yeah.
old ideas. And the past is a great like source and reference point and kind of jumping off point. But one thing that's led me more towards I think mass media than kind of my current community in the visual arts is that I don't know if it's this particular time or I'm missing understanding the historical context and this was always the case. But as I learned art history, people were trying to leverage the historical canon to propel themselves into the future towards new ideas. There was an investment in, the kind of abstract notion of the avant-garde. And nowadays, I think more often what I experience is people trying to mirror the past and mirror trends and mirror. And I find that actually to be pretty devastating as like someone who kind of wants to like move into the future and reshape the world and discover kind of, if I'm the antenna, I want to discover new signals.
Yeah. No, that's again McLuhan. It's mirroring or matching. Matching. No, he called it matching or making. Yeah, matching. Yeah, Anyways, really good. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yes. Yeah. It's a little bit disparaging, but I don't think this was just asked of me the other day. I can't remember why or where, but I was a child living in Colorado and I was very thirsty, and my mom was drinking out of one of my colored plastic cups, and I asked her if I could have some of her water, and she said no. And when she left the room, I drank it anyway, and it definitely wasn't water. So she was secretly drinking wine, and that's the first memory I've ever have.
That's a great. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a curse.
Wow, dude, you are honest. And that is, 99% of people go, oh, it's a blessing. Well, it could be a curse.
Well, you know what's weird is I think for the first time, and maybe this is COVID has kind of influenced my, I don't know, way of looking at the world, but I definitely feel at a certain stage and a certain age where I'm starting to have a very different context of like what time is, because time dilates based on our perception. And it's also measured against memories. And I've accumulated enough memories and I've experienced enough time that it's changing, and the memories can be haunting in that context because it really can show how short our experience is on this planet. We go through pleasures and also hardships, and we carry those all.
Yeah, it's really great. You're laying it down, with your honesty. That's really good, because if you haven't seen Chris Marker's Sans Soleil, you should. It's like all about escaping time. It's about dealing with time. But both James Joyce and Frank Zappa said all times are happening now. So tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Okay, so I have an uncle who, he's lived a little bit of a conventional life in the sense that he worked some kind of corporate consulting job. I still don't understand what he did, but I knew from an early age that he was one of these extreme sports guys. So he did competitive skydiving. He's done shipwreck scuba diving. And as much as it isn't, I don't identify with that as a creative act. He definitely was interested in pushing some edge and kind of going to the beat of his own drum in the face of risks. There is physical risks. I think artists often face psychological risks and isolation because of our relationship to kind of the broader culture. And so, his name's Richard, and I just kind of think about him semi-frequently. And when I feel like, oh man, I'm kind of off the map here as far as what my family had hoped that I would be and do, I know that he also kind of tested those boundaries with expectation and how he wanted to experience the world. And then outside of my family, this is a little bit of a cheat answer, but Doug Harvey.
Well, that's really good. What did you get from Doug?
Well, Doug's been, I consider him family now. So that's the cheat of the question. But he really, more than anyone that I ever have met or has been part of my community, he's continuously expanded my horizons as far as what I'm exposed to in culture, challenging ideas in ways that I could have never imagined.
Yeah.
And he really opened up experimental music, that world, to me. And I kind of think like that I have like a weird mild regret in my life is that I was living in Texas at the time, and then decided to pursue art more intensely. And so I went to UCLA, and it was kind of a crossroads where a group of friends of mine who we didn't know what experimental music was, but we were kind of doing that in Austin. And they got into a bus and they drove up to Eureka, California to go work on some pot farms, and then migrated to Portland. And they were kind of more experiencing a kind of freewheeling lifestyle and just leaning into making music, being out in the world, constantly changing direction whenever they seem fit. And I kind of was in the university taking classes, and it was an incredible experience. But I wonder, I'm like, oh, what would I have taken in at that particular time? The reason why it's not a true regret is because I met Doug, and Doug did that psychically for me.
That is so well put. He became your Ken Kesey without going on the bus.
Yep, exactly. 100%.
Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yes, Christianity.
And did you check out, or you still practice?
I'm not practicing. No. I consider myself a spiritual person, in a really kind of abstract way, is that I do believe there's very complex systems that make up the universe, and I have no freaking clue. And I think our terrestrial experience is a fragment of kind of what is out there. And so I assume that there's like either some meta consciousness or something. And that's kind of where my spirituality exists today.
Do you pray?
I have. And I actually, I would say yes. Yes.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I don't know about what to say, but I would love just to be welcomed to whatever space that, that consciousness is existing in.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Oh gosh. Wow. I used to think evil people existed. But that's kind of in contradiction to a lot of my other beliefs about creativity and consciousness and us being antennas or receivers. And so I think people can have experiences that open them up to a darkness that, we call evil.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think someone's born evil. I like, everyone kind of uses the example of Hitler and stuff, but it's like, I think his life took a very unfortunate path that helped facilitate what he became, regrettably. And I think they're like, if you believe where there's ideas about like parallel universes and how time, like every version of reality and time exists simultaneously. There's a theory out there. If that's true, I think there's versions of him that is a perfectly good person. that never went down that path. So
that's all at once, and it's all times are happening now. That was good. I'm glad you brought that word up. Those two words up, parallel universe. But really, Daniel, the hidden question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from The Mob and the Samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I don't often disagree with Alan Watts. I really appreciate a lot of his thinking. I think there's some more complex version of that, which is if you acknowledge your enemy and you respond to your enemy, you empower them. Or it could even be more complicated, is how you acknowledge your enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that's probably how, what I would prefer that version of his statement to be.
But how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
I think it depends on their needs. I've had encounters. I don't really have enemies. I don't believe I have enemies, particularly, but I've had kind of confrontations with people over time. And I think at different periods of time, I needed to do different things. At one period of time, I needed to go all out and just, let them have it. At other periods of time, I just needed to listen to them and let them, air their grievances. And, so it really depends on what the person needs.
Yeah. Well, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then someone said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson says, if a criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff? Or does he go, wow, I did something morally and socially wrong? It's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
God, this is such a tough question. I think there's a lot of studies coming out that suggest it doesn't. It's a hard one that I've had a hard time letting go of, because I've not necessarily my parents, and I don't recall any experience in school, but I was always raised to believe that there has to be kind of some kind of boundaries to create a certain amount of like public safety and protect us. As every day that goes by, I believe that was more kind of fear-based thinking. And I want to say no. I want to say reasoning. Yeah. I think it comes down to reasoning and dialogue versus punishment.
Yeah. Well put. I appreciate that. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think we're so caught between our internal world and our external world that it's hard to take in the kind of our present experience in a complete way enough that I think, yes, like I love that idea of stepping outside of the building just to see a real tree. Yet at the same time, the framing devices of cinema opens that tree up in a different way. And we might actually be able to see that tree in a more expansive way than if we were standing right under it.
Yeah. Here's two quotes on art. I'm curious your just basic reaction. Mike Kelly, making art is making my problems everybody else's problems. Any comment?
Well,
why do you say you love it? I'm interested.
Well, I think it's hilarious, and I didn't know Mike personally, but
by the way, I asked him all these questions twice. 10 years apart, I interviewed him twice.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible! I'm curious what he kind of followed.
Yeah, I don't know if I asked him that one. You know, it's like the questions have morphed over the years, but I can tell you the answer. The second to the last question, I'll tell you what he said after you answer it.
I'm very excited. Well, earlier I referenced that one of my driving forces of making things is that I want the external world to more reflect my internal world. And so kind of what I believe reality to be, or what I want to experience, I try to make those things.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, like, I think there's the cliche of artists are society's misfits. Or at least that's maybe a little bit more of an American idea.
Yeah.
But I just love, Mike Kelly was had a bit of like a rabble rouser edge to him. And I think the rest of society is happy to make their problems our problems.
Yeah.
And whatever problems are going on within the brain of Mark Zuckerberg, he certainly made those our problems.
Yeah.
And so I love the fact, just the boldness of, well, yeah, so can we. And
that is so good. That's like, I asked Craig Baldwin, cinema's been films have been hijacked by capitalism. He goes, yeah, and it's our job to hijack it back.
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
But here's another one. This is a poet, Fanny Howe. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now that one I don't get. That's why I ask people.
Yeah.
That it sounds good what she's kind of saying, but I'm wondering how you sort of suss that out.
Well, I guess my like knee-jerk reaction would be I tend to want to believe I'm an optimist. I kind of like to think in my day-to-day experience, like, oh, I kind of steer towards what's possible versus what's not possible.
Yeah.
Although I have a really kind of a cynicism about the world and where the world's heading. And I definitely am kind of one of the greatest things that have shaped my life and my creative making is kind of contemporary, kind of existential fears around. First it was 9/11 and terrorism, and then it's kind of evolved into climate change. And so like there is something to be said for like the darkness of the world helps you see the light.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably how I would interpret maybe what she's getting at. And I do believe that. I think like it kind of brings it into context, the sour makes sweeter and vice versa.
Yeah. It's like Leonard Cohen, you can't have light without a crack.
Yep.
So that was good. So walk us through, Daniel. Did your parents, where's your tipping point? You go, I'm going to be a multimedia artist. You said you went to UCLA. Were your parents taking you to art galleries and art museum growing up? Did you form an aesthetic in grade school and high school? And I was, oh, I'm going to be an artist. Like, where's your tipping point? Well, that's my calling.
Well, for sure. Eventually, let's circle back. I'm so curious what Mike Kelly had said to that previous prompt.
The one I just asked about. Well, which question?
It was a couple questions ago.
No, I don't remember. They're both online. They're both on YouTube. You can watch
them. Okay, I'll look them up.
And then report back to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Believe me, I'll tell you something revealing. When Mike committed suicide, I said, dude, you're too fucking smart to commit suicide. I was pissed at him. Now he has a right to do that.
Yep.
And I've asked major Kelly people, why'd he do it? And there's 5 different stories.
Yep.
Somehow I can't go back, and I don't go back and listen to interviews usually, but you would think that was so major that I would at least go back once it got posted on YouTube and watch it. I can't watch it. It's too creepy for me, because it's like, dude, what the fuck? How can, so it's not fair. It's an unfair bias on me, but it's still,
suicide's a really complicated thing. Yeah. And I can't divorce myself from kind of that anger, like, what the hell? And I've been told that, and I don't know, I kind of doubt that this was a serious consideration, but I've been told that he would at least joke near the end of his life about quitting the art world and becoming an experimental musician.
Well, he was always an experiment. No, the great thing is he says, I'm a noise musician.
Exactly. A noise.
I love that.
And he was. And it's like, what's strange is, like, as time goes on, it's like, yeah, I feel like emotional burdens building, and you sometimes you feel like you carry more the weight of your memories and lives, and all like fractured relationships, this and that. And I think, when he would say that, I think that must have been about kind of shedding some of the disillusionment with how corporate the art world has become. And, there is something emancipating about noise music, in which there really isn't an economy. There's just it, and a very niche amount of people that truly embrace, it. And it's like, anytime I meet someone who really actually sits down and listens to noise music, I mean, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I need to understand who you are. Like, I'll take it in, and I like to make it more than I like to kind of consume it.
You go. That's the important thing, Daniel, because it's like, in 20 years of YouTube, I says the only thing YouTube exists so I can watch Cecil Taylor or Sun Ra. It's like, okay, this is worthy. Or the Shags.
Yes. Yeah.
But So did your tipping point calling?
Well, the tipping point. So this will be slightly long-winded, but I have lived in a lot of places. I was born in Colorado. I moved to England. I moved to Northern California. I moved to Texas, and then I eventually made it out here to Los Angeles. And I was a kid in England, and pretty young, between 5 and 8 years old while I lived there. And we really did travel all over Europe and experience, so much museum, nothing contemporary that I could recall. And I honestly don't know that I believe that was very impressionable on me. I think I was probably too young as far as like taking in that type of art. When we moved to California, all of a sudden it was Northern California, but to me it was like around that time when we moved, I was studying kind of Western expansion through the British kind of educational lens. And like, I mean, I thought there was fully intact, undisturbed native tribes that inhabited the redwood forest, and all this kind of, it was a very kind of uninformed, child's view of like the fantasy of the West as a like land of possibility and mystery. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden I'm living there, and I go from having almost no exposure to music or culture or anything, and I might as well thought that I landed right in Hollywood or Culver City, or where all the movies were being made. It just felt like, oh my god, I'm here in this like vortex of culture.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of two tipping points. Entering that kind of what felt like a vortex of culture, is it just kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. I
Yeah.
want to be a part of whatever this is. And then we moved to Texas, and it was just before 9/11, and I was really, I didn't know about Austin's music history. I think I would
Yeah.
have been a little bit more into the idea of moving there had I understood that better. But I moved to Austin, and 9/11 happened, and it kind of really recolored how I viewed the world. And I think I had a very different relationship just to life. I think that's when I kind of leaned into like seeing life through kind of, all right, every day is like an existential
Yeah.
conundrum. And so I basically went through quite a rebellious experience in Austin, and I started doing improvisational music, and I got to see the revival and return of Rocky Erickson. That was incredible. And I really started to invest in the idea of, you know, I want to return to what I thought was kind of the vortex or epicenter of culture. And I
Yeah.
also wanted to contribute. And so, and I didn't want to do anything else. So I was doing very poorly in school, and I really didn't care until I took an art class, and I started to do very well. And it was an interesting experience where it was like, okay, I'm breaking the rules now, and I'm getting punished kind of universally for just defying, I'm not going to do any assignments. I'm not going to do any studies. I'm not interested. Yet I'm open. I'm like open to art class. I'm open to drawing. I'm open to uh, things where I could kind of define my space. And then all of a sudden, with kind of the great um, kind of support of my art teacher, uh, I started to kind of excel, and excel in a way that um, I got kind of I got let off the hook in all the other areas. So
Yeah.
somehow I would start barely passing my other classes, even though I wasn't doing any of the assignments. And it was like a rare moment in my life where I felt like, oh wow, like I can operate through this space.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that was possible. And that was like, I think the true turning point where I was like, oh gosh, like if I can kind of do whatever I want and make whatever I want, and that is good enough for me to exist, then why am I not doing this all the time? And
Yeah.
I'm going to get the F out of here, and I'm going to go to California and do this even more, where a ton of other people are doing it.
Duh. That's brilliant, because that's what I tell our students. I say, get your job and your life as mixed up as possible. Same thing Duchamp said. You don't separate. Oh, I'm going to my job now. But did your parents have a culture arts sensibility taking you, or they not at all, or a little?
Not at all. I come
Really?
from a pretty like 1950s stylized
Yeah.
family. Mom was a kind of a homemaker. She had some, careers, but pretty limited. My dad was like a corporate finance dude,
Yeah.
and just I think for them, there's a little bit of like, I don't know what the hell's going on, but
Yeah.
if he's not like destitute, then good enough for us.
Right. That's good. So now Very well put. You described that well, Daniel. Thank you. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. The opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're making a piece of art, what role does intention play in your creative process?
Oh God. Yeah. I think intention has actually played more of a negative role, at least recently. I think like, and this is where like Doug's influence on me is is probably or at least on my thinking is that I think Doug would suggest that like there's like the intelligence of kind of accidents or happenstance or mistakes. And there's like an intelligence in things being lost in translation, where I think sometimes like um, I think the hubris of thinking that we have it all figured out limits the potential of what we can actually accomplish if we partner intention with, you know, embracing like some of the best moments of my life have been where something accidental happens and I'm like not distracted enough to realize what just happened.
No. So Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your potential viewer when you're making your art?
I used to think about at least the space and the experience of viewing the art all the time. During my time at UCLA, I would, and this was a little bit arrogant of me, but I would, because the Hammer Museum was right near the campus and there's like an affiliation, I would just think like, oh, okay, what pieces like, or I would have a germ of an idea and then I would kind of try to petri dish it in with one of those spaces in mind. And nowadays I think about it less and less.
Yeah.
And there's a reason is because um I did this big piece, Desert Lighthouse, and I so much in the leading up to you know, its creation, I really kind of wondered like, God, like what experience are people going to have? Are they going to think it's a UFO? Are they going to, you know, is there going to be anger? Is there going to be pleasure? And what was odd, which is almost the entire first year that it existed, just it went unnoticed. And both in the art world and in the desert area which it's located. And it really kind of, I think, messed with me a little bit, where it's like, wow, like there's this idea that you do something and people respond, which is a total something that is not, you know, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. There can just be no notice. And so I really, I think that really changed and steered me away from thinking about what someone might experience while they're viewing it versus just what do I want to create? What do
Yeah.
I want to experience when it exists?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Desert Lighthouse for a moment, because how many years did you plan it and execute it? And then is it ongoing? And then after those 2 years of no one noticing, has it changed with your audience? Yeah.
For sure. Um, so I made a series of works that came out of a uh, I call it hallucinatory, but it was kind of like lucid dreaming state, and the lighthouse was one of them. And it so from the idea time that I had the idea, it took me about 10 years. And most of those years were me trying to build up the confidence to say, like, gosh. And then there was certainly tons of logistical trying to figure out, well, how do I afford this? What does it look like? How, where is it located? And then it's been up for just over 6 years. Or no, wait, yeah, just over 6 years. July 1st was the 6-year anniversary. And yeah, it went, there was no notice of it for, I think it was more like a year where there was just nothing. And then the notice became quite concerning, where I would go out there to check on it and have to do regular maintenance just because the conditions are so hard. And Barstow is nearby to where it's located. And there was like 6 months to a year where people just relentlessly, almost daily, were trying to break in to steal whatever. I don't know if they thought tools were in there. I don't know if it was just for the copper wiring. And I jokingly in my diaries call it the battle for the Desert Lighthouse, because it was literally like every single day I would show up and I would add more spikes to the fence. I would repair how they tried to break into the door. And then that night they would come after it again. And then I would come back in the morning. And it really was a bit of a darker time, because I went from it being such a serene space out there to being like, oh my God, I'm like fighting with likely meth addicts over, this probably copper wire. And that went on for almost a year. And then there was a strange thing where that dipped off. And it was in the winter of 2018 that I was, my brother had never been out there, and I took him out and we were visiting, and I noticed something not too far from the lighthouse, maybe about 100 feet. And I thought, gosh, it looks sparkly. Did someone have a party? Is that, I don't know what the name of it is, but there's like kind of those tassels, those plastic metallic tassels. And so I started wandering over and I saw the tassels, and they were draped on a white cross. And I started getting closer and closer and getting a little bit panicked, thinking like it was just like a cross that you would see on the side of a road marking where someone had a fatal accident. And there was no other information. It was just a white cross and some tassels. And I started researching like, gosh, did someone die here, or what's going on? Eventually, through some internet sleuthing, I figured out that someone passed away in Barstow. It was a younger woman, and it was drug related. And her family then decided to spread her ashes and create a memorial for her at the lighthouse. And about a year later, I met her mother at the location, and she was kind of adding to the memorial. But that completely changed everything, because I was kind of depressed. Like, gosh, like I would have imagined, other artists and the art world would have been interested in this landmark. And I don't know if I identify it as a land art piece or a landmark or like interventionist art or what, but it was odd to me that there didn't seem to be any response. And then to have someone respond in such an intense way as to spread the ashes of a loved one was like, whoa, I have my whole paradigm on like what art can do and who might respond and how they might respond was like completely blown apart. And the lighthouse is ongoing. It's almost it's undergone some renovations recently, because the conditions are so brutal out there that the wind just kept tearing off the siding. And so I've completely redone all the exterior siding, and I'm just doing some final detailing on it. And I'm hoping for it to keep going for another 5-10 10 plus years. And then at that point in time, I'll kind of determine whether or not I have the resources and finances to keep it going. But I like the idea that it's just
Yeah.
indefinite. It just keeps going and
Beautiful.
yeah.
It's great that I don't know how to name it, land art or interventionist art or a lighthouse. It's beautiful, but two questions, and I definitely want to see it. When did Doug's article come out? In 10 years, 5 years into, or 8 or 3? And then did that help you, or was it, and what's the relationship of the death memorial with Doug's article?
Yeah. Well, Doug did, let me think about this. Well, Doug and I collaborated on something. I'm going to get you a copy. It's called Desert Lighthouse Prospectus.
Yeah.
And this is before the lighthouse was built, but I was in the planning stages. And we were both musing on, how funny it would be, because I was trying to raise money and get grants and this and that.
Like sort of like a Cristo project.
Exactly.
And you mean Perspectives is a booklet?
It's a booklet, and it's but what we were kind of a little bit tricksters in that, like, ours is a satirical, it's almost like kind of a mockumentary of what a true prospectus would be. And so Doug did quite a bit of writing in it, and we both see it as like a collaborative art piece.
Yeah.
And but it did kind of help contextualize the lighthouse, and it kind of made fun of it, made fun of us, made fun of like land art and the art world. And so later, Doug did kind of 2 articles. One, he mentioned the lighthouse in an article about 10 LA artists you should know if you don't know, something along that. And then he did an artillery article, which came out about, gosh, I want to say
pre the death memorial or post?
It was post. Yeah.
Post. Okay,
post.
Good.
And basically Doug's summation was the military oddly advertises the lighthouse to its soldiers as a nearby weekend destination to, if you're bored, go out to the lighthouse.
Like a tourist trap.
Yeah. And then the local community with the memorial has responded to it. And he basically gave this whole list of, it seems like everyone's responded to it except for the contemporary art world, which is true largely. But at the same token, like, I kind of am starting to recognize that there's a much broader, arguably more important viewer -- audience that can receive it. And it's like, it's need to be in the art historical canon, like, is debatable. I think,
Well, that's a good attitude, Daniel. And there's another question. Did the mom tell you why the daughter, did she go there and the daughter said, I like to go here and it's a comfort place, or it's where I hang out? Or did the mom give you a reason why the memorial is near the lighthouse?
She did. I forget if she mentioned if the daughter had been up there or not, but what the mom said is that they could see the lighthouse at night from where they were living, and that they like to look up at night knowing that's where she was at.
And the lighthouse has a light beaming out all the time, or just at night?
Just at night. During the day, it would be too bright for it to be perceptible. So we saved
that's a budget. That's electricity. Yeah. Is that did that have to be cleared with government? Like, we're going to have this light going, and they said yes.
Yeah, it was the weirdest thing. I think one of the weirder things I've ever experienced is that I knew that I could barely afford to make it.
Yeah.
And I would have no money to take it down if it wasn't
Yeah.
done to everyone's liking. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to try to get permits for this thing.
Yeah.
And I had to rezone the parcel. There's all these things that I had to do, but everyone was very supportive. Everyone thought like,
Yeah.
great, Hinckley, which is the Aaron Brockovich community. It's on the outskirts of Hinckley. And I think they were just like, cool, if you want to invest in that community. And
Yeah.
so it came, once I got to the analyzing the building permits and doing the photometric studies and all that kind of stuff, I had a real stickler in the building department that said, nope, you're violating the light pollution laws. And I kept proposing, like, I was going to do a makeshift Fresnel lens, which is the kind of lens
Yeah.
technology that lighthouses use. And so I proposed like 3 or 4 different light fixtures, and he wouldn't have any of it. And I was almost just gonna like say, okay, forget the light, just give me the permit to build this thing, and then I
Yeah.
was gonna go rogue on the light. But on a last ditch effort, I was so frustrated with him that I looked up an actual lighthouse beacon from a company in Houston, and I sent him it, and he just was like, great, works for me.
Oh my God.
And
That's
the reason it worked for him is that I'm sure you know about Fresnels, but maybe people who are watching don't know, is that it was an 18th century lens technology, which is essentially a single piece of glass, but it's shaped in a way that's almost like stacked magnifying lenses.
yeah.
And it takes a small light and it projects it an incredible distance.
Yeah.
And so for him, all he cared about was wattage. He just was like,
Wow.
wattage. And there, so like I think currently there's 10-watt bulbs, which you'd think are barely emit any light, but it's shocking how much light they can emit. But 10 watts for a halogen bulb only will emit so many lumens.
Yeah.
So based on the laws and the protections of the dark sky out there, there's a lumens cap. Well, if you don't go over that, it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
far the light travels, or if it's focused, or if it's, shot up or down or left or right. And so um, the flip side of that is the lighthouse has a fantastic, true marine grade beacon at the top. The downside is it was a boatload of money, and that really added a complication. But I'm really grateful because some of the visuals, like I've filmed the lighthouse with a drone and everything, and I think it goes to that question of intention. Like,
Yeah.
I was intending to do something else, and I felt like what I had planned on doing met my creative needs,
Yeah.
and this happened, and it's so much better, and
Yeah.
the structure's better, and it's a beautiful object, and
Yeah, you're proud of it, and it's beautiful that it came off, I mean, I saw Christo lecture at Cal Arts once, and he's sort of set up that, yeah, spend 10, 20 years filling out papers, and then you do it, and then everyone, and the Maisel brothers make a film about it, and then you go to another city, and all it is filling out forms for cities. That's your art form more than the art itself. But again, and then the fence falls over and kills someone. Oh no, like
Yep.
but did you know I did a lecture on land art once, so I had to study it, and it was hilarious, because do you know what's sort of proclaimed as the kind of first piece of land art?
I don't know.
Oh
No.
God, it's so funny. It's 1962. Klaus Oldenburg had a guy dig a hole in Central Park, and there's like 5 kids standing around. It's not very big.
Oh,
When
wow.
5 kids are standing around and looking at it, and that's the documentation. Like he dug a hole. That's the beginning of land art. It's
Which
like,
is hilarious. And like there's a very similar work of Chris Burden's where he dug like a 100-foot trench or something like that. And there's something like I'm not really that versed in like the
Yeah.
legacy of like pranksterism.
Yeah.
But there's something kind of prankster about land art. And I think there can be really like stuffy, snooty land art, but it's just there's something hilarious. And I love that example. And I'm not recalling that piece, but I'm gonna look it up and I must have bumped into it in the past.
And then bust me, because I'm always like, is this the first time this happened in this art form? Like experimental music is a good example. I went up to David Rosenblum, like the godhead of Cal Arts experimental music, and I said, so what's the first time someone used tape on stage with a live performance?
Yeah.
And he goes, I'm not into first. I'm like, get over it, dude. I'm just saying, you know the history well, because I heard it was Stockhausen in 62. Same as that. Then I finally did the research, and it was French guys in the 20s.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I would have guessed John Cage, but
right. But it is it's funny, these first things. So, some art person wrote in some article Klaus Oldenburg first. So, it could be way before that, because I mean, whatever. With it's just like, I like to know when, just like performance art. Jack Smith and Alan Caprow invented performance art. No, they didn't. That was happening. No, because the critics or someone labeled it, that's performance art. So as a genre,
that's when the genre was created.
That's where I say, the punk rock thing, who started punk rock. But I like to say Jack Smith and Alan Caprow. But I know there's performance way before that. Yeah. So it's just in sussing out the histories.
Well, so, just a quick comment on that is, like, when I had the idea for the lighthouse, it didn't have a name to it. It was more like a visual that I had. And as I kind of sat with it and tried to kind of decipher, the kind of the visual that I had experienced, it was almost like a blurry image that came into focus. And I was like, oh, fuck, this thing's a lighthouse. And, it's out in the desert. And it kind of seemed cheesy almost, to the point where I was like, let me like research online to see if something like this must exist. And there are things that are similar, but as like a creative act of like, I'm intentionally doing this displaced lighthouse in the desert, nothing through Google Images. And then if you search it now, there's a million things. There's video games that have that motif that almost certainly have nothing to do with my project. And it's like, that's where I think we're a conduit, where like an idea kind of germinates and it just spreads like wildfire.
No, it's zeitgeist. It's all that. You're tuned in. That's beautiful. And I love your idea. It's like land art's sort of bullshit. It's like all art is bullshit. That's the great comment Mike says in my interview. He says, art is the last bastion where you can get away with anything. Thank God there's one thing, it's like George Clinton says, think it ain't illegal yet.
Yeah.
But I love that idea, because James Turrell, he started with a slide projector in Santa Monica, like a mile from here, in his room with no slide in it, just showing some light in a corner. And then what did he develop? This thing, that he's building a crater, and it probably is the greatest piece of art on earth right now, blah, blah, blah. And, then Jay-Z goes, I'm giving him money. And it's like, oh, no. And then, nobody can go see it unless you're a highbrow. Or like Doug could probably can I get a pass to go see it while it's being made? And I like to want to like it. But at the same time, I want to hate. It's like my friend, when Marina Abramovich became huge, I said, and my friend's a professional performance artist, she's highbrow, and I says, man, she sold a videotape for 70 grand. That sort of raises the bar on your art form. She goes, that's bullshit. I goes, go ahead, call it bullshit, man. 70 grand for a cheesy videotape of some performance art, and you're always bitching about money.
Yep. Yeah. It's so incredible and strange, and like, yeah, how the meaning of it all changes, and money's relationship and celebrity relationship to all these things. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre.
Well, you're in a great art form. But I would like to suggest, Daniel, I asked for 90 minutes and we got about 15 more minutes. And I've only gotten through, question number 14. And I usually do about 40 questions. Would you be willing to do a part 2, like 2 or 3 months down the line?
I'd love to.
Okay, so let's stay on this sort of subject for the next 10 or 15 more minutes. And you've touched on this, but it's interesting because it can cross over to your sensibility being an experimental improviser in music and in film, in how you sussed out the lighthouse. It was beautiful the way you gave us that history of how it morphed,
Mm-hmm.
And Ruth Draper says, the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. So, that sounds good, but how do you do that? So, how do you do that as a improv experimental musician? And even how did you do that as a installation, or what do you want to call that? Land art.
Yeah. Intervention
artist. You sort of already said, well, they came to me and said, I'm going to put my ashes, but it has been this ongoing 10. So you've had other opportunities to meet the viewers, and then you have some sort of sensibility when you do live music. I know there might not be a huge crowd, but there are people there. So how do you bring them up onto the stage with you?
Well, yeah, that's so I perform almost exclusively under a pseudonym called Kenneth Friendliness.
Yeah.
And I have tons of recordings that eventually I'm going to release as records and stuff, but those seem to always be getting demoted. But there's like the Kenneth Friendliness pseudonym. I think the idea was to take kind of our artistic egos out of the music and allow us to kind of have maybe more of like an open playing field.
Yeah.
But it also is like an opportunity for me to exercise like different parts of my personality, where like, part of my personality is like, well, like I want to be in like personable with people and this and that. But Kenneth Friendliness is definitely like an antagonistic, character. And definitely I've done lots of performing. Keep in mind, these are vocalizations where, they kind of land somewhere between like repetitious, kind of lyrical play and like, schizophrenic, crazy person on Sunset Boulevard. And so it can kind of morph and I mean, at times it's like, I don't think for me that the spark is there unless I'm responding to people directly. And so sometimes it's responding to the other performers, if there are other performers. Sometimes it's responding to people. And it's like a little bit, I wouldn't say mocking, but it's a little bit of like, hey, I'm going to see you as a like entity to kind of push off of, and then, we'll get like some rhythm happening. And so I would say, musically, that's probably the extent of the interaction and kind of, I experience it as a collaboration. I don't totally know how others experience it.
Yeah.
And then creatively, maybe like winding the lens more broadly, I really am at a stage where like I don't feel a huge intention on making gallery works anymore.
Yeah.
Not that I have any problem with that. I kind of love gallery shows. I do enjoy conceiving of those types of works, but like with the lighthouse, there was a real question, and I would often be pushed up against when I was talking about my intention to do it, because there was many years where I was intending to make the lighthouse and it wasn't yet happening. And I think a lot of people were like, well, why even make it? Like you've generated the idea, you've generated the concept. That's good enough. And I think my answer was really, well, but I want to experience it. I want to like take that journey. And I have a project called Radical Mountain, and it's going to be a film, and it'll be a narrative film. So it's not going to be like particularly experimental, but the reason why I don't make a bunch of artworks about, Radical Mountain, this, the ideas contained within that film, and why I want it to be a film, is because I want to get to the closest space I can to like living the story.
Yeah.
And it's a like sci-fi absurdist like journey film out into like the middle of nowhere. And I also want to have that context to bring people with me. And so there will be kind of some like happenings that will involve audience members and this and that will like both be filmed, and there'll be events, and they'll kind of be these kind of multi purpose happenings. And I just, every like day that goes by, I veer further away from the like, the idea is the idea and let's have a nice container for it. I like the complication and the like web of what happens when we're all tangled in this idea in the real world, and it's like kind of happening to us.
Yeah. It's really good wording. It's brought up so much. It's like I worked for George Carlin a bit, and we got a flyer in the mail once, and it says, "I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity."
That's great.
Like, yeah, but this is beautiful, Radical Mountain. And what you said before that, A Crazy Person on Sunset. Have you ever listened to Wildman Fisher?
No, I'm gonna note that down.
Yeah, you might. He is the father of, well, I'm sorry to say this, retard rock. You can't say that word anymore. Sorry, but it's, what are you going to say? The father of neurodiverse rock, and it's basically what he did. He was a crazy person in the 60s on Sunset Boulevard, and he'd sell songs for a nickel and a quarter, and Frank Zappa produced him, and he has a huge career. And there's a documentary on him, and Rosemary Clooney did a duet with them, and blah blah blah. But it is like just another crazy person on Sunset Boulevard. Well, there's the epitome, and you can make it too, and not like, clean up your act and do it right. It's like Daniel Thompson becoming huge because Kurt Cobain had his t-shirt, and when he had the cover of Rolling Stone. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I love that. I love that example. And I mean, I think when I got to LA, that was the big like mind-blowing moment of like, oh yes, like this historically has been and continues to be a place where there's so much space for weirdness and so much space for eccentricity, and like what people generate is truly the currency. And there was a quote. This is a paraphrase, but Werner Herzog was kind of questioned,
Yeah.
New York versus LA. And in his opinion, New York was, the city of consumption and advertising and all that kind of stuff. And LA is the city of production where people universally go here to create, and that being the huge distinction. And I hope it doesn't get lost. And there's always the danger that it is being lost actively, but like it's still there. And there's plenty of examples.
It's like, I'll tell you that you should take this piece and do it, because I've hung out on the Venice Boardwalk for 40 years, and it's just like an amazing, because these people are my family and my friends, and you can have $1 million movie director next to a homeless wino junkie and you can't tell the difference. Exactly. But if you go to Marina del Rey or Santa Monica, you can tell the difference.
Yeah.
And so, I've known a lot of them, and they're just not quite insane enough that I said, well, we should have this night at the Hammer, because I like the Hammer. I've seen great art there, but I almost always projectile puke because it's fucking rich consumer. It's just so icky in the long run, but all the power to it, and it's free and blah blah blah. And so you have these, I called it like Venice something tribe, V something tribe. I could send you the blurb, and it's like you get 5 of these homeless ranters to go up on stage for 5 or 10 minutes and rant, and then you call it performance art, but it's authentic. It's authentic, but it is like getting them to do that. I know what it would go through, but it's still the idea alone, and having actors do it or whatever is mind-blowing, because whether the audience has to know that they're crazy homeless people or not, there's no difference in the long run in the great performance artist world. So it's sort of like once you brought up the other guy you really evoked with the Radical Mountain was Leonard Knight. You know about the guy I've shown 5 documentaries on him over 30 years. He's the guy who just pours paint on top of paint.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Yep. And, that guy, talk about toxic.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But if you watch him, he's sort of like, the godhead of it all is really Simon Rodeo, who made the Watts Towers.
Yes. Yep.
Because he can't tell you, why did you do this? And then when he's done, he goes, okay, I'm done. And he just left. He didn't go, collect $5 for everybody who sees this and send me. He's a visionary artist. The difference between folk artists or outsider artists and a visionary artist, they have a vision.
Yep.
The folk artists are just like driven to just, Henry Darger or these people.
Sure.
Yeah. So the other question we could dabble in maybe close out with is something you touched on, and it's Leonard Cohen saying, the only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. That is such a heavy statement. So what role does risk play in your creative process? And then what he's saying is, how much are you aware that they kind of want to know and don't want? They want you to, he knew what he's doing, but I kind of want him not to know. So what role does risk play? Yeah.
Well, God, I've thought about this recently, because there's a lot of my creative output that I actually haven't put front and center. So Doug's much more aware of like the full scale of my kind of creative activities, and like the lighthouses, I've been very proud of that, in that I feel like there was a good amount of risk and continues to be a good amount of risk. And I'm trying to develop a film that, tells the story and all the tendrils of, people responding and all sorts of things. But meanwhile, like I've been collaborating with a friend of mine. We've known each other, God, since 2007, 2008. And I don't know what he'd classify himself as, maybe a performance artist, maybe not even an artist at all, but he's just one of those people that have like a spark to them and are relentlessly engaging to watch. And we've done a series of videos. One of them, we infiltrated a reality TV show where he posed as someone who had a addiction to drinking vinegar. And we now present it as a collaborative video work. And it aired on TV, and at least until a couple of years ago, it still aired on TV. And then we just copied the recording and we'll, we present it. And I kind of feel like if I filtered myself less, I would have a much broader audience, and also I would probably be much more appreciated. Not that that's like the goal. It's like,
what does that mean though, Daniel?
Yeah.
What does that mean if you filtered? What's
So I think far too long I've had opportunities to do, commercial gallery shows. I did one smaller museum show, and I've done relatively like conventional exhibitions.
Yeah.
And recently I did an exhibition about the lighthouse. It was called Desert Lighthouse 5, and it was in downtown LA. And there was a lot of photographs, and there was, a short film about the lighthouse, and some sculptural works and ephemera and stuff. And it just like, I was very proud of it, but it doesn't capture the bizarreness and the insanity of what has truly happened out in the world, where and usually the only way, some of the best parts of my kind of the creative ecosystem that I've cultivated reach the world is through me telling stories. And so recently the lighthouse got renovated. I have a friend out there that has helped me. He was an electrician's assistant when it first got built, and we've just stayed in touch, and we'll meet up and we'll do repairs and stuff. Well, me and him single-handedly stripped all of this old siding off the lighthouse, completely re-sided it. We had what is it called? Sandblasted and repainted. And it was like two crazy people, climbing all over this 50-foot structure. And it was so like, some of the stuff we were doing, we were as safe as we could, but it was so dangerous, which is interesting. But the more interesting thing is that like, he was amidst a manic bipolar episode, and he was trying to like rescue people, and he was bringing strange individuals that he would meet at the gas station in the middle of the night because he couldn't sleep, and he would like bring them to the location to work, and they were often like ex-felons, or one dude was like developmentally disordered and quite severely. And it was just like when you think about a like cinematic example, there's two pairings of films that come to mind. There's Apocalypse Now, and then the documentary of its making, I think it was called Heart of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness, yes.
Yep.
Good.
And then Fitzcarraldo, and then the paired documentary, The Burden of Dreams.
Yeah.
And there's like art in all of those.
Yeah.
And I think like I've predominantly presented the like intentional film, and I've not quite brought the audience as much into some of the like background insanity that has happened.
Yeah.
And like as I'm going forward to figure out how do I open that up and bring all that stuff into the work, because it's the riskier thing to do, because there's a greater chance people will be offended, or it'll look bad, or it'll be disparaging. There's a loss of control that happens. But I think like the true like potential of the art exists in that much higher risk zone. And I just like, I want to do everything I can to like push further into risk versus like maybe in the past I've steered a bit away from risk.
Yeah. You're like, you have to practice in the real world to get to the risk. It's sort of like, I would say the three guys in the experimental film world, experimental music world, are Ornette, Sun Romp, and Cecil, and Captain Beefheart.
Yep.
And I know Ornette learned King Curtis. He learned how to play sax.
Yep.
But for some reason, I think he naturally went out. Like Jackson Pollock had to learn Thomas Benton Hart to go out.
Yep.
Sun Ra kind of had to learn that. Beefheart kind of. But those guys, I think they're almost naturally out.
Yep.
And everybody else has to learn to play out.
Yep.
So you're like saying, I want to go out and I've learned the straight world. In order, you have to, it's like the more you practice, the luckier you get. But it's really, you're on the right path, and just articulating it with words to me, and that breakdown on the Herzog and the Coppola, that's really well put. But there was one other thing you said there. Anyway, Craig Baldwin. Have you ever seen Tribulation 99?
I have, and I have a copy of it, but it's like on my rewatch list because I have all these films to rewatch.
Yeah, and you can't, Trib is like, it's just like Room 237. It's like these films. You can't watch them on a small screen on your left. You have to watch them in a theater with a big audience. But Doug's been I actually have a great story about Doug having me introduce Tribulation at Echo Park Film Center. In this Cal Arts professor yelled at me and goes, "We don't need you to explain this film." And I was like, dude, I'm just talking about questions. It was so classic. But Craig, this big book on Craig just came out, and I have an essay in it. I told Doug about it. I want to live, but in that regard, it's sort of like what you're describing is sort of what Craig is describing with the essay film Sans Soleil by Chris Marker. Zigaverput, Man with the Moving Camera. F is for Fake by Orson Welles. It's a fake film. It's a pseudo film. It's not just a fake documentary. Everything, it's a fake documentary or a mockumentary. No, it's deeper. You can't tell if they're really faking it or not. It's like, so you have that sensibility. But why don't we close out with these two, and then we'll schedule a part two. Truly enlightening. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Oh, thank you.
And so Hollis Frampton, who's definitely in that range of fake experimental films almost, he says narrative, and since you brought up storytelling, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Man, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think there's it's always there. I'd like to believe that. I'd like, it sounds fantastic.
Well, the problem with that question is people don't know. They're just like, what do you mean? They don't know whether to take it metaphorically or literally.
Yeah.
So I don't put it in the context. And then the question that I asked Mike, because I promised you, because if the world ends and we don't do a part two, you had to get the punchline one.
Yeah.
It's, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Oh God. Well, I'm going to do a poor job articulating it, but I think like a lot, you asked an earlier question about like a close relative that inspired you or had
Yeah.
impact on you? Well, I think, a lot of my relatives, and this is, a lot of society, there's a value system that kind of champions like, a hyper productive worker bee, support the, corporate
Yeah.
cause. And you get all these rewards, you get all the
Yeah.
great, materialistic
Yeah.
pleasures. And I kind of don't want any of that. I just think, if I could, if like I would exchange, any fancy item for some weird music device or this or that. And so I think I really don't want like the riches of our society.
Yeah.
I
That,
think they're pretty poisonous
yeah.
and unfulfilling.
That's actually the answer I get the most. Tell me something good you never had and you never want is fame, money, and heroin. Those are the three answers I get the most.
Wow.
So yours was sort of fame and money. So that,
Yep.
Mike Kelly said kids.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is, it's a question. You know what NLP is, neuro linguistic programming?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So it's actually a question they asked. And I took it
wow.
out of the context of them
Yeah.
because they go, oh, if your eyes go up, you're this kind of person. They go down, you're this kind of person, you're straight ahead. I don't even do that. I just think it's a cool question.
It is a cool
question. And it's often what is on the person's mind that they're concerned with. Tell me
Yep.
something good. And Mike was, I think, with his girlfriend, the dancer, and she was saying, like women often do, give me a kid or I'm out of here. And he was like,
Yep. Yep.
So that I thought that was a good answer, because a lot of people go, well, if it's good, I want it. So I was like, well, and I just found this list in one of my notebooks of about 20 answers to the question over the years. But it's funny that I remember the other Mike Kelly question. So we'll end with this one. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Oh God. Like, is it kind of like a which would you pick? Like,
well, again, Daniel, it's back to my beginning. You put it into the context you want.
God. Yeah. Well, I'd probably mask the vomit smell with the shit.
You would what?
Mask the vomit smell with the shit.
Yeah. Mask the vomit with the yeah. So Mike said, cry.
Oh, that's so good.
Isn't that amazing? That isn't
so
because I've had so many great answers to that question. I'll tell you too. That's a good one, but it's so Mike because he's a feeling. One person said, I wouldn't be in a situation like that. They just said, no,
like,
hey, I wouldn't be there. So, fuck you. I'm not even going to answer it because I would never be there. But here's actually the greatest. This woman on the Venice boardwalk, you're in a bad vomit, someone throws a bag of shit at her. What'd you do? She goes, well, I'd take the velocity of the bag of shit and I'd use it to swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. I said, do you know you just described Descent in the Maelstrom by Edgar Allan Poe? The sailor is being killed by the boat being smushed by the weather, and he just studies the pattern of the broken boat parts, and he uses it to get out of the death of the whirlpool.
Wow.
So anyways, that was good.
That's so good. And that Mike Kelly, I mean, that's like, I don't know. I think that's like a micro example of his genius. I don't know. It just,
yeah. The other thing I forgot to tell you, when his obituary appeared in the New York Times, they actually quoted and they said, one art critic said, his art made me feel soiled.
Oh wow, that's true.
I'm
I
like,
love that.
I love to say it's like, that's why like John Waters and all these big shot people go, Mike Kelly's so cool. It's like, yeah, they all want to tag on to him because he kind of did what Frank Zappa said so well on David Letterman. I don't have any brown lipstick in my makeup kit.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Art
great.
Crumb, Frank, Mike Kelly. There's a few people who just,
Yeah.
but
Unapologetic.
Schrader said, wrote Taxi Driver.
Yep.
His parents wouldn't let him watch movies growing up. So you better be careful because your kid might grow up and write Taxi Driver. He said the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail.
I love that.
That's nice, but it is really kind of, there's a flip to it. It's like, oh, my art is so pure. Even when I attempted to sell out, I failed.
That's true.
It is a flip, but it's actually Al Flipside too, the punk magazine. He said, don't sell out, sneak in.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that. Oh my God.
Well, Daniel, I've learned a lot. It's really a pleasure talking to you, and I'll send you some dates and we'll book part 2 because there's lots more to discuss. You're really articulate, and I love how concise you are with expressing yourself with the words. So,
well, I appreciate it. Jerry, it's just been a pleasure. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
And thanks again to Doug. So even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever, ever, even after part 2.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye.